Hey folks, and welcome to Natural Defensive Tactics. I'm your host Joe Calderon. So thank you for joining us today and checking out the video series. I'm humbled, and I'm getting a lot of fantastic feedback from people that I've known for many years and people I don't even know. And the ranges are from defensive tactics experts all the way to the novice. So this is fantastic. So thank you. Sidebar, these are transition lenses, so I'm not trying to look cool. I'm behind the lenses and I'm with you 100%, but they get a little dark in the sun. Anyhow, today's lesson is really about deploying your weapons in the appropriate range, and we'll describe what those ranges are and what weapons to use. We're also going to talk a little bit about the elbow strike, which is one of my favorite weapons in a close quarters situation. But I'd like to start out by saying each one of these lessons and episodes are standalone. If you've noticed, they're described that way. The intro, breathing, mindset, soft targeting. So if you're just joining us and this is your first episode, you haven't missed anything. You can go back to episode 7 or 6 and it's just standalone. So it's a building block approach. So at the end of this series, you'll have a better understanding about the world of violence and defensive tactics and self-defense, but you can go back and review any of those things as many times as you want. I'm going to depart from my usual safety tip, and those of you know me know that I have tons of those safety tips. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the questions I received in the past, just in the last 3 or 4 weeks on the series. And one individual who's a good friend of mine wanted to talk about or ask me about the knee in general. So, how to target the knee, where do I kick the knee, things like that. And so it's important to know that the knee is one of those sight, bone, and wind, right? So if I can't stand, I can't fight. So the knee, which is built to go forwards and backwards, not side to side, right, is an interesting beast because I have a good friend who's a co-worker of mine and also a golfing buddy who's about 6'6", and I'm going to use him as an example. He knows who he is. And we went on a business trip one time and we're sitting at a restaurant, and on the way there I remember looking at him going, man, this guy's a big guy, very tall guy. Now I'm a height liar. I am probably 5'11 3/4. I think when I was about 18 or 19 or 20 I was about 6 feet. I'm shrinking, but he is a legit 6'6". So as we're walking to the restaurant, we get sat. I'm looking basically eye to eye with this individual, and it's almost freaky, And so I wanted to let you know, I've got how I am with the diagrams and pictures. This is the old one. Like I said before, the human body is an interesting thing. The distance between your feet and to your knee, was it the tibia, the bone there, typically is very close to a person that's 6'6" or a person that's 6 foot tall. Where their length is, if they're tall, is between their knee and their hip, that femur bone, or their torso. And to be honest with you, nothing better describes that than this picture here of a famous basketball player and his girlfriend, probably his past girlfriend, but nonetheless. And I've got arrows pointing their knees. This individual here is 7'1" on a good day. She is 5'2". So if I target my knee or his knee or her knee, it's generally the same area, if that makes sense to you. Since I have just a moment, I'd love to show this picture one last time because I've got 2 buddies, Sam and Eddie, that always tease me about this. Anyhow, so to go back to the knee, I talked about it's built to go forwards and backwards. So it's much easier. Now you can attack it going forward and maybe crush the knee, the kneecap, hyperextend the knee, some contusions, some sprains, obviously. But you got to be pretty accurate. If you miss that, you're going to kind of go through that. Now you're really in close quarters areas. So it's much easier maybe to go lateral, go sideways. The knee's not meant to go that direction. It's even better if you can go from the back side, obviously. If you ever come behind somebody and kind of hug them and then kind of bend your knee to the back of their knee and they collapse right away, That's what I'm talking about. So to go after the knee, to target the knee, use your knee as kind of a range first, because their knee is probably going to be, they're taller, maybe an inch or 2 or 3 inches higher. If they're shorter, maybe that same half inch or 1 inch below your knee. Hopefully that helps. Okay, let's move on to the subjects of today, and that's going to be ranges, what type of weapons to deploy in those ranges, the threats in those ranges, and also we're going to talk about the elbow strike. So let's begin with the ranges. I kind of break down the range system into 4 areas. The first area, the distance range, the long distance range, which is I call it the projectile range. Those areas there, you're susceptible to, let's call it firearms, contact weapons. A baseball bat would be a contact weapon, an edged weapon, a knife or a blade. Some people are so mean, they could be a threat by yelling at you, obviously. But that distance range, you're going to need more than just your hands, your knees, your feet, and your head. Okay, you're outside of those ranges. Then we move into what I call the long range, and the long range might be the kicking range. If I kick you, I'm probably going to cover more distance than trying to reach and punch you. So if you're in a situation in the kicking range, you're already telling yourself the threat is the legs, unless he takes a step into that range and closes that gap. Once he closes that gap, that punching range moves in, or the medium range, we'll call it, the intermediate range. The punching range now is anything. Remember that jab cross, that big haymaker that typically most people will throw initially. It's usually the hands, right? Still can be the legs, but it's typically the hands. And then you move into the short range, okay, the close quarters range, or I call it the clinch range. And that's when the elbows, the head-butting, the gouging, the clawing, the biting, the back of the wrist. You've got multiple weapons within that close quarters range. If you can remember that, it's important, because if they're in the long range and they can kick you, I can kick them typically, unless it's a tall basketball player, obviously. If they're in medium range, if I can tap you, you can tap me. If they're in the close clinch range, the close quarters range, if I can elbow you, guess what? You can elbow me. So when you're in those ranges, understand that the threat also has the same options you have. That threat may be better prepared in those ranges than you are. Give you an example. I'm not typically a ground fighter. Now, I can sprawl. I used to teach ground fighting, but I'm not an expert at it. So I typically want to be a stand-up guy. Now, if I go to the ground, I've worked out long and hard enough over many years that if you've never worked out on the ground, I probably have a huge advantage over you. So if you're very tall and you don't have cauliflower ears, or maybe a Gracie t-shirt that says, I earned this 20 years ago, I'm probably going to take you to the ground, because it evens the playing field a little bit. Okay? So you can change those ranges. Now, in the defensive tactics world, you do not want to get on the ground, because you can't escape from the ground. All your weapons are very limited from the ground. Case in point, if you're on your back in a guard position, he's on top of you or she's on top of you. There's few things you can do outside of an elbow strike or a headbutt, just minimal things. You're in more of a position to get that 90 seconds and maybe have them drain all their energy, right? And fight back as much as you can to get back on your feet, to either deliver a blow or escape. So the mindset here in the defensive tactics world is try to stay on your feet. If that makes sense to you now. Okay, try, stay on your feet. Moving on to the close quarters, because we're going to talk about elbow strikes. In that close quarters world, and I said a few words like a headbutt, clawing, I said biting, I said gouging, pinching, shoulders into the chin. There's multiple close quarters ranges. The most effective is your knees and your elbows. And it just makes sense because both your knees and your elbows, hard surfaces in the soft tissue areas, are very effective. Now the elbow, I love the elbow because it gives you a lot of different options. The elbow itself, and I'm going to talk about the target areas you're going to use, is you got the point obviously, and if you hit that funny that funny bone there, it does hurt. We're not hitting the funny bone. We're going to go in front of the funny bone, okay, the typical funny bone area, and this is the area that you're going to use to do a strike. Now, those strikes can be based off of just a jab elbow. It could be a downward elbow, like we had talked, a cross elbow. It's used as a cutting tool. It'll make cuts, obviously, and a power tool, all in one. You do not have to deploy that elbow as hard as possible. A simple jab that doesn't take a lot of effort, but you can say I can step into it and throw the jab elbow, will be very, very effective. A cross elbow, especially when the person's coming in, just coming straight across, will be highly effective. Now, if you've noticed, when I'm throwing these techniques, my hands are open. Now, I'm not going to go back and try to convince you open hand is better. Again, it just comes to the anatomy of it. And let me explain why. First of all, not only do you cover more distance, right? More coverage, but more importantly, when you throw an elbow, if you close your fist, the muscles encapsulate what we call the ulna bone. You can hear that bone. Once I close my fist, it's a lot flatter. So it's the muscle encapsulates it. It also restricts the distance. So you can do this on your own. If you open your hand and just do an uppercut elbow to this point, for me as an older gentleman, that's a little bit, can't stretch out as much. It feels pretty, the range feels pretty good. Once I close my fist, it doesn't go as high in a natural setting. Same thing with the cross elbow, it doesn't go as far. Opened up, it goes further, much easier. It almost feels like it's lubricated in a way. So, in order to use that bone, that ulna bone in there that we use at outside 90, obviously, you don't want to choose to close your fists if you can. Now, I always go back to if that's natural for you, then use it. Not a big deal. So, in terms of the elbow itself, tons of targeting areas. Talking a little bit more about developing the elbow strikes a little bit, knowing we start basically from that passive NDT stance, just taking that step forward, blading a little bit on that dominant side, the strong side, the low guard, the high guard position, the outside 90 on the balls of my feet, just off of my heels, right? Kind of leaning forward a little bit. In that passive position, you can deploy those same weapons over and over and over again. And what I mean by that is I've taught you the first, those 10 sequence, the jab, the cross, the hook, the uppercut, the downward elbow, the reverse elbow, the hammerhead strike, the downward elbow, reverse elbow, hammerhead strike. Now we just use the elbows itself in that same defensive tactic position. Let me just give you a few techniques, gross motor skill based. So from this position, I can throw a jab elbow. There's the target area. I can throw a downward elbow. There's the target area. Now remember, I'm always covering up. I'm tucking my chin in. I can do a cross elbow, same thing, an uppercut elbow on both sides. I can do a reverse elbow from the back to his temple or his head or his nose. Now when I do a reverse elbow, this is the target area I'm using, okay? The last thing is, and again, if you lower your level, you can hit that same elbow to the groin, okay, the soft tissue areas. You can also use what we call a tomahawk elbow. Guy charges you in, you don't have a chance to sprawl, or you're inside a 90, he's just too fast for you, or too big, or whatever, a combination of both. You can do what's called a tomahawk elbow and just drive into the clavicle, the collarbone, the neck. Those are all simple techniques. Now, I want to remind you, okay, you can't just deploy these things without practicing, right? So I want you to practice those elbows and feel the range. Open your hands and throw them. Close your fists. See if it's restricted to you, right? See if the range changes. I also want to make sure you throw them in multiples of 3 minimum. Now, in a real altercation, and you can get on your feet or stay on your feet, and that individual comes in and closes the distance on you, and you throw that first elbow, you've got to follow up with a minimum of 2 other strikes. They don't have to be elbow strikes, especially if the person's not in that range anymore. It can actually be a poke in the eye, it can be a bite, it can be an open hand strike to the side of the head. But I want you to start with just one simple elbow strike, maybe a cross elbow, and tell yourself, what would I do from here? Maybe a hammer fist to the head, and just to push them off me to run. So start thinking in sequences of 3 right now. I think that's it. I'm glad you joined me today for NDT. I'll be back with some future episodes. Again, thank you for the support.